Good afternoon. We have a quorum present, and I'm calling the September 1st, 2015 Board of Education meeting to order. And we have a very special guest with us today. Would Reese Mernicki please come forward? And she will lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So Reese, you're from Pleasant Valley Elementary School, and would you like to tell us something about the area that you live in? I happen to live in Pleasant Valley, South County as well, and something about the school. Moving on. What do you like best at Pleasant Valley? What are your favorite grades, your favorite classes, subjects?
I like doing science and doing all the experiments.
Okay, great. And you're a fifth grader? Okay. And what do you plan to do when you move up to middle school? You go up to Boonesboro Middle School?
I think so.
You think so. I think you have some guests that you brought with you. Would you introduce them, please?
I brought my stepdad, and I brought my principal, Mrs. Mayanato.
Thank you. Welcome. Appreciate it. Very good. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother that's in middle school.
So you'll probably be following up to middle school, right? And he attends Boonesboro Middle. I'm getting a head shake in the back. Thank you. Is there anything you'd like us to know about you?
The sport I like to do is horseback riding.
Horseback riding.
Oh, nice.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I appreciate it. Would any of my colleagues like to ask a question?
I have a question.
Mr. Gesford.
Do you have a pony?
Yes.
What's your pony's name?
I have 3 that I ride.
What is that again?
I have 3 that I ride.
You have 3?
Yeah.
Wow. Do you keep them at your house or do you board them somewhere?
I keep them at my house.
Very nice. Well, thank you for sharing that.
You have to tell us their names.
Jack, Elmo, and Obi.
Elmo?
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 Jack? Good.
Very good. Any other questions? And again, this is always the best part of our meetings. And we've gone all summer without a guest here, so this is great. Thank you, Reese, for coming. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. After that wonderful start, I'm looking for an approval of the agenda.
Madam President, I move for the approval of the agenda as presented by the Agenda Planning Committee.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. Approval of the agenda. All those in favor? 7-0. Student concurs. Approval of minutes.
Yes, Madam President, I move for approval of the minutes of the closed session held on Tuesday, August 18th, 2015, and of the business meeting also held that day, Tuesday, August 18th, 2015.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor? 7-0. Student concurs. Thank you. At this point, I have no one signed up for public comments. Anyone in the audience that would like to share something with us, please come forward. Okay, very good. We're moving to unfinished business and consideration of a couple second reads. Mr. Trotta.
Board of Education approved a decision of policy IGBA at its public business meeting conducted on August the 18th. The community has been provided with an opportunity to provide comments. We have not received any comments regarding this particular policy. The Policy Committee is requesting the Board of Education to approve the second reading of policy IGBA. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion on this action.
Madam President, I move for the approval of the second reading to rescind policy IGBA entitled Programs for Handicapped Students.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Any discussion, questions, comments? Mrs. Fisher?
Just a reminder that this is covered both in Comar and school law, and therefore is unnecessary to duplicate it in policy.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Seeing no further questions, the motion is Mrs. Fisher's motion on the second reading. All those in favor? 7-0, student concurs. And the next one?
Yes, thank you. The Board of Education approved the rescission of policies AD, AF, and IA at its public business meeting conducted on August the 18th. Policy AF is entitled Commitment to Accomplishment. Policy AD is entitled Philosophy of Education. And Policy IA is entitled Instructional Goals and Learning Objectives. Since the first reading, members of the community were provided an opportunity to offer comments. We have not received any comments. We are requesting the board's approval of the second reading of the rescission of these three policies. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion.
Madam President, I move to approve the second reading to rescind policy AD entitled Philosophy of Education, policy AF entitled Commitment to Accomplishment, and policy IA entitled Instructional Goals and Learning Objectives.
Very good. A second?
Second.
Mr. Ridenour? Any discussion? Ms. Fisher?
Once again, these, in many cases, are very outdated based on our new vision. And we have proposed that as we go forward with perhaps a handbook, that these be reconsidered and perhaps rewritten, not as policy, but as articles within that handbook. It's been the thinking of the Policy Committee.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ms. Williams?
Yes. As I said at the time of the first read, and that's been several weeks ago, I feel that the philosophy of education belongs in policy. I think as a guiding policy, it certainly could be in a board member handbook that may be developed, but I don't see it as an either or. We have a process for creating policy, for reviewing and revising existing policy, for suspending and rescinding existing policy. We don't have a process established for the creation of a handbook or any assurance that a handbook will be created or how it will be updated. So I'm going to be voting against this because I would like to see this philosophy of education policy maintained in policy. Similarly, with regard to policy AF, I would like to see us at least retain the opening paragraph and at least numbers 3 and 4 of this policy. Numbers 3 and 4 speak to the evaluation of operations, programs, instruction, and services. And number 4 speaks to the evaluation efforts of employees, of the board itself. And I think these are 3 things that belong in a policy. And so I will be voting to, again, as I said, to not rescind these policies.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Other comments, questions? All right, the question is on Mrs. Fisher's motion. Those in favor, please signify. That is 4. Those opposed? 3 opposed, and the student concurs with the majority. The motion moves forward. Thank you. New business. The approval and signing of the amendment to the negotiated agreement between the Washington County Board of Education and the Washington County Teachers Association. Will the members come forward? I believe we have Laura Francisco, Dr. Wilcox, Neil Becker is here, and Mary Newby, President and Vice President of WCTA. Dr. Wilcox, Mrs. Francisco, comments?
Simply like to say to the board that we have worked for quite some time with the Teachers Association to get to this moment where we can sign this agreement. While we, from time to time, have disagreements, I think we all are agreeable in the sense that we worked together to come up with the best possible solution given our current resources. I'm particularly proud of the leadership that the association has demonstrated in this process, their willingness to compromise, their willingness to come forward with new ideas, thoughtful perspectives, really, I think, meant a great deal to us and bodes well for a future together where we are engaged in the service of young people. So I'm proud to sign this document, but I also recognize that Mr. Becker may have something to say as well.
I plan to recognize him. Mr. Becker and Ms. Newby, thank you. With both?
In a similar manner, we recognize the hard work that both teams put forth to accomplish this. Coming to any agreement is a challenge in these tight physical times, but we did the best we could with the resources we had. And I'm looking forward to, in about a month, starting up on the new negotiations for the current and then the next fiscal year. So I'm optimistic that it will go even more smoothly as we enter into the sessions again.
Very good. This is a formal action, formal agreement, so I would need a motion.
President.
And a second?
Second.
Discussion and comments.
Brightman?
Yes, Dr. Hardings.
I too want to thank the association for continuing to be partners. I want to thank our negotiating team as well for keeping us informed and working with us to try to come up with creative ways that we could come to an agreement. I'm pleased that we've reached that point and look forward to getting this approved so that our employees can have a little bit extra in their paychecks and really know that this board does appreciate the work that they do and understands that they are expected to bring their A game every day, and this is what we can do to try to help let them know that we do appreciate that. As Mr. Becker mentioned, we'll head back into negotiations in about a month. So really this is about the only opportunity a board member gets to comment on negotiations because it seems like we're always in negotiations. So I just want to say a word or two. We had a work session a couple weeks ago where it was discussed having a board member attend negotiation sessions. I think, especially in a year when pay is the only, about the only, if not the only, item under negotiations, I think we ought to move to open negotiations. I can't see, we construct our budget in public. We have public work sessions. Our revenues are publicly available from the county, from the state. We build our budget starting, the board part of that process starts in February and moves often through the end of March, April, and into May. So everybody out there can see what funds the board may dedicate or not dedicate to a salary resource pool. We do that in a very public way because I think to do it in any other way would be considered negotiating in bad faith. So as we build that budget publicly and seek public comment, everybody knows what the board's position is and where the board is regarding funds available to provide raises to its employees. While that's going on very publicly, there's a very private conversation going on, and that's the negotiation process. I don't see what benefit there is to the public or to the process by having us build our entire budget in public, as we should, but then close the doors and talk about how much we can provide to which employee groups. As we build that public budget, employees come and speak and tell us that our priorities are misguided. And that happened this year in our public hearing. And that's fine. We want that feedback. But the point is the public has the benefit of seeing everything that we are doing in preparing our budget and preparing to develop the funds that are required to provide raises. What the public never sees and can't ever know is what's being asked for on the other side. So in a year when all we're talking about is salary, I can't see any reason that the public shouldn't have access to both sides of that ledger. They're watching us to build our budget in public, and I think they ought to know what our employee groups are asking for. And they can come to their own judgment about where we end up and whether we've deprioritized our employees, whether we've placed the appropriate priority, whether there are other priorities that are competing, and how we balance all of those things. We're public officials and we should be held accountable for that. But right now, the public doesn't see that. So again, since I only get one chance every year to talk about negotiations, I want to throw that out there because I can't see what benefit it is to either side, really, to have negotiations that are closed when all we're talking about is salary and the public watches us build our budget in public. So with that said, thank you again for your partnership, and look forward to moving forward next year.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Other members with comments? Okay, I'll just basically say that this vote of ratification is a culmination of months of hard work on everyone's part. Negotiations can always be challenging, even in the best of times. And we all know with some of the financial constraints that we've had before us and may have going forward, that a collaborative process is really important. And I think we all need to start with open minds and stay with open minds and be open to diverse opinions. I also think this ratification really signifies a commitment of this board to our certificated employees, and that we do value them, and that we consider you the highest part of our team in our classroom with our students, and we appreciate all you do on the front lines day to day. So again, with our team, with our principals, our support personnel, our students, our parents, that's what school communities and what this board is trying to build, and really what is part of our vision. So thank you for putting the future first, and our children are certainly our future. So with that, I'm going to call for if any other considerations, comments. Then I will call for a vote on Mr. Ridenour's motion to approve this ratification. All those in favor? 7-0, and student concurs. Thank you. And I think we're going to go ahead and do the signing.
So I will sign on behalf of the board as your secretary treasurer, and then ask the two board officers to come down and sign as well. Neil, you want to sign at the same time as I do?
Sounds great.
All right. And we'll sign one last one so that everybody has one. Dr. Hardings, Mrs. Brightman.
Do we hand out pens?
I think these go back as part of the board
Is that-
allotment. They go back to the HR board.
Very good. Thank you again.
Again, thank you.
Absolutely appreciate it.
Mr. Becker, there is one copy for the association, and then if the board members will bring our other copies forward.
Oh, all
Thank you.
right. They keep one, we keep one. And who gets the other one?
Ms. Newby, thank you very much for coming out of your professional development to be with us.
Both
Thank
of
you.
them then.
As the audience gets reset, I think it's probably important that we speak to this agreement that was just signed by the board members. This agreement between the Washington County Teachers Association and the Washington County Board of Education provides for one step for our employees on the negotiated salary scale. In addition, it establishes a new step 21, which is 1.15% beyond the 20th step. It will stay at 21st step until perhaps there is another negotiation that would impact the overall schedule, but right now it's there in perpetuity. The agreement is effective July 1, 2015. We are in the process of calculating the retroactive pay for our employees who worked after July 1, but prior to this ratification. I will tell you that with our next full payroll, which I believe is the 11th, of this week, we will have the new pay rate in place for all of our employees. The following pay period, which is the 25th, we will have the retroactive pay that we owe our employees for this short period of time in their checks. So that's what we hope to do, Mr. Becker. We're working very hard on that right now.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
clarification. I'm sure that's important to the membership to hear that. So, thank you very much. With any other comments before we leave this agenda item? All right, moving on to consideration, first reading of proposed changes to policy CBI.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Trotta.
Thank you. As a part of its comprehensive review of the policy manual, the Policy Committee is recommending that policy CBI, entitled School Superintendent Evaluation, be updated, and that the exhibit CBI-E, the evaluation cycle, be rescinded. The Policy Committee is recommending the approval of the first reading of these items. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion, please?
Madam President, I move for the approval of the first reading of changes to policy CBI, School Superintendent Evaluation, and a rescission of Exhibit CBI-E, the evaluation cycle, Superintendent Evaluation Process Timeline.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. A second?
Second.
Mr. Ridenour. Thank you. Mrs. Fisher, discussion on this action.
We had concerns as we were updating policies that this does not totally agree with the new contract that has been drawn up with the superintendent. And the timeline itself was completely ignored or out of sync with what we've been doing. And I believe we discovered that there is no requirement for a policy on evaluation.
Yeah, thank you. Any further discussion, questions? Yes, Mrs. Williams.
When Mrs. Fisher says there's no requirement for having a policy, meaning required by law, or what? When you say there's no requirement for having a policy?
There are certain policies that are required in COMAR in law, required by the state MSDE, but there appears to be no requirement for a policy explaining the evaluation.
Mr. Trotto, could you expand on that, please?
That statement.
There seemed to be some
That
confusion.
statement is correct.
You're usually very expansive. What's happened?
Well, under Maryland law, local boards of education are authorized and empowered to select a superintendent and to enter into a contract. Mrs. Fisher's point was there's no state mandated requirement that you also then have a policy that sets forth the process that you will follow as you go through that requirement of locating, identifying, and awarding a contract to a superintendent.
Maybe
Yes.
I should expand a little bit. I said that there was a conflict between the superintendent's current contract and this policy, and the contract supersedes policy. Therefore, we would either have to, we could, I guess, rewrite a new CBI policy, but since it's already, the contract sets forth the procedure, why is it necessary? This one's wrong. It doesn't match.
Yes, Mrs. Harshman.
Well, if we aren't going to follow a contract or a policy in evaluation, then why are we writing a policy in it? When did we stop following the policy? And if we aren't going to follow a policy, why are we writing policies?
I don't know in the past if this has been accurate, but with the new contract for the superintendent, it isn't accurate.
I know it hasn't been followed. I understand that completely. It has not been followed. Ever since I got on the board, I don't believe this has been followed verbatim for the policy, but why are we writing a policy that we have no intentions of following?
Dr. Harding.
This was written, well, it was updated on October 7th. I have no idea when it was originally written.
Dr. Hardings.
Mrs. Brightman, I think the purpose, as I recall the policy committee's discussion, was to, Mrs. Harshman's correct, the old policy was not being followed. So what we've tried to do is write a policy that says we will evaluate the superintendent, but the details of how we do it are going to be left to the contract.
So,
And that's what the new policy that's being considered for first read does.
okay, so
So it's-
each superintendent that comes in will be evaluated depending upon what we decide that year. There's no policy for this is your evaluation. The board will have the right to evaluate whichever superintendent is here in any way it sees fit, because there'll be nothing to follow. Is that what you're saying?
It's
I
in the
think what we're saying is that the process for evaluating any superintendent will be based on what the board and the superintendent mutually agree to in that superintendent's contract. That's what we're saying. And I think I've only worked with 2 superintendents, but I can't imagine that any superintendent would sign a contract without the contract speaking to the method by which the board will evaluate the superintendent. That's in any contract.
Well, I didn't say that. I meant without something being written down in policy that would be very easy to follow each year, as opposed to making something up at the start of a new superintendent. I'm not understanding why one year the evaluation is this for this particular superintendent, and if that changes, then maybe the next year, if you have a different superintendent, the evaluation is totally different. I've never seen an employee have a position where the contract was determined by who sat in that position. Usually there is a policy that says this is what that person will do. And I just don't understand why it would change from year to year and person to person.
Mrs. Williams.
So if we have no policy that puts forth the process, should we have a new superintendent at any given time, we would go back to the previous superintendent's contract to use as a base, or it would just be totally up for discussion with the recently hired superintendent as to how that evaluation is going to unfold? That's my question.
Mr. Ridenour.
Well, I would respond to that. Anytime you hire a new superintendent, and anytime you hire a chief executive officer for a position, you negotiate them with them. When we offered the job to Dr. Wilcox, or we offer the job to any superintendent, he will acknowledge that he is interested, and then we enter into negotiations as far as a contract is concerned. The contract will include language that deals with our responsibility of evaluating the superintendent, but it has to be mutually agreed upon, or that individual will not accept the contract. So if that occurs, then you're back to finding another superintendent. You know, it is a matter of negotiations, just like we just went through here. We negotiate with a new employee or a new superintendent for their contract. And the contract includes language that speaks to the evaluation and the evaluation process. So the new policy, I mean, it takes care of that. It says, superintendent evaluate, therefore the process to be followed to evaluate the superintendent's performance is to be mutually agreeable and is to be set forth in the contract between the superintendent and the Board of Education. If we would write a new policy, it would be redundant. The superintendent's contract is public record. Anyone who wants to know what the evaluation policy or evaluation criteria are, they can look at his contract.
Ms. Harshman.
So again, my question is, every time there's a new superintendent, are we rewriting how that person will be evaluated? So one may be evaluated by written information, one may be an interview, and so on. So there is no standard for evaluation from year to year or person to person.
Again, I think we're all repeating the same question and the same answer. A superintendent is evaluated based on the negotiated language of his or her contract with this board. So again, this policy, the way I understand it, basically states that there will be an evaluation. And on number 3, the policy statement, as an employee of the Board of Education and not of Washington County Public Schools, the provisions of policy GCN, which handle the evaluation of school system employees, do not apply to the superintendent. Therefore, the process to be followed to evaluate the superintendent's performance is to be mutually agreeable and to be set forth in the contract between the superintendent and the Board of Education. So the policy committee felt that was a fairly clear statement of how this would work going forward. Mrs. Greenwald. Miss.
I have a clarification question.
Yes.
If Dr. Wilcox's evaluation was negotiated in his contract, what does this specifically change?
Nothing.
By rescinding this policy, anything?
We're rescinding the old one, which was not in alignment with the contract and did not say that basically the superintendent will be evaluated based on the negotiated contract. So we're clarifying the process that we already follow. Does that?
It does, yeah.
Thank you. Other, Mrs. Fisher.
I think maybe what's missing here is when we do sit down with a new superintendent, or even if it's just a new year of the evaluation of the same superintendent, it's a mutually agreed upon. It's not, what I'm hearing, it makes it sound like the superintendent writes his own evaluation. It's got to be agreed upon it's worked out with the board, and we have a vote on it.
Yes, Mrs. Williams.
Perhaps I'm missing it, but I don't see anything in here that speaks to frequency. And my expectation would be that this would be something that would happen annually, and yet I don't see the word annually anywhere in here. Is that by design, or is that just an omission?
That's in the contract, and that's in the contract. The whole process is in the contract. The word annual is in the contract.
Annually for the evaluation process.
Mm-hmm. Questions, additional?
I would not object to putting the word annually into this somewhere.
How
I mean, it happens annually. It does every year.
So without the contract alongside the policy, how would a board member know?
Because you have access to the contract.
And a new board member coming on, let's say we have 7 new board members and they want to begin the evaluation process. They would know, looking at this, to sit down and have a discussion with the superintendent about how he and they feel he should be evaluated.
I believe one of the first documents in a whole packet of documents that new board members receive in their orientation and once they're sworn in is a copy of the contract. The contract is in the public domain.
Not to take exception, but I requested a copy of the superintendent's contract when I became a board member. It was not included in anything, but that's neither here nor there. Mrs. Fisher, I appreciate your agreement that we need annually in here, and I would like to make an amendment, if I may, Mrs. Brightman, when the discussion.
Can I ask you first something before you make that amendment? When would we have 7 new board members? Unless
I don't know.
we all die at the same time?
I don't know. Maybe there would be resignations. I don't know. I just pulled that out of thin air, Mrs. Fisher.
If I could just offer some clarification.
Yes, Mr. Trotta, please.
I think there's 2 separate and distinct concepts. The first is the process. The process is covered by the policy. The policy has always covered the process. So if you were to examine the existing policy that's being rescinded and look at the new policy that's being recommended, what you would see is process. And the policy as now being recommended reflects what we actually have been doing over the last several years. So it brings the process up to speed. Let's talk about the second part of the equation, that is the actual evaluation. What are the standards? They are not standards that change. The standards are in the superintendent's contract. And so you have to look at those 2 documents. One gives you guidance on process. The other gives you guidance on the standards to be applied to evaluate the superintendent. I see this as something just bringing us up to speed on the status quo, the policy updates.
Mr. Gessford.
Is it possible that we can send this back to the policy committee to reevaluate?
This is only first
This
read.
is
Again,
first
this
read.
is just a first
Automatically
read.
goes back.
Okay.
We have a whole nother second read on it and 2 weeks in
We don't
between.
have anything to
So
be upset
there's,
about right now, so.
we're taking feedback from today as we do on
Good.
first reads. The policy committee then waits 2 weeks for any other feedback from this public examination of this, and then we bring it back for a second read. So we've taken comments into consideration on this first read.
Mrs. Brightman?
Yes.
I would just point out that Article 12 of the negotiated agreement is unit member evaluation, which to me means that the method by which our teachers are evaluated is negotiated between the exclusive negotiating entity for the teachers and the Board of Education and the management of Washington County Public Schools. So if The Board of Education negotiates with its teachers how we will evaluate them, and don't simply impose an evaluation process on our teachers. I don't know by what principle we would then say, but with the superintendent, we're not going to negotiate an evaluation process with the superintendent. We're just going to impose a process on him. I think we owe the superintendent at least as much courtesy in terms of negotiating the process by which we are going to evaluate him as we pay to all of our other employees whose evaluation is based on a process that's negotiated.
Thank you for that comparison. Any other comments? We're going to move this forward. This is Mrs. Fisher's motion. All those in favor of this first read? We have 4 in favor. Those opposed? 3 opposed, and the student concurs with the majority. This moves forward. We will take this up again at our next policy committee meeting, and comments that were brought forward would be taken under consideration. Another first read.
Yes, thank you.
Tony, before you do,
Oh.
can I just say one thing?
Sorry.
I resisted telling you, got through because I didn't want to influence. I just want the community to know I had nothing to do with that conversation. I didn't weigh in on the need for policy or not. I'm perfectly fine with the contractual arrangement that I have with this board. It was negotiated through their labor attorney originally and has been subsequently amended by the majority of the board every time. So please don't think that I'm asking, Neil, I see you sitting there, please don't think that the teacher, I don't want the teachers to think that I'm asking for something that they don't have. I want to be clear on that. Actually, they have better right now, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Trotta.
Thank you. The Maryland State Department of Education has requested all the boards of education across the state of Maryland to examine their current policy that governs the reporting of child abuse and child neglect. The policy committee conducted 2 work sessions on August the 10th and 25th to take a look at the current policy, and it is offering the board the following recommendations. The first is that the current policy be rescinded and that a new policy be adopted, and we've provided you with the proposed new policy. And that this new policy should also set forth certain key terms which did not appear in the prior policy. As the policy committee was conducting its review of this matter, it noted that under Maryland law, only certificated staff, that would be your teachers, your principals, assistant principals, are mandated under Maryland law to report child abuse or child neglect. The policy committee is recommending that this new policy should require all school system employees to report suspected cases of abuse or neglect. In the event the Board of Education moves forward with this recommendation, the policy committee is recommending that all staff be informed of this new requirement and that training be provided as appropriate to staff that may not be aware of this new requirement. I would point out that our certificated staff every year prior to the commencement of the school year are reminded of this legal mandate that they must report suspected cases of child abuse or child neglect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Mrs. Fisher, you're up again.
Madam President, I move for the approval of first reading of proposed policy JLF entitled Reporting of Suspected Child Abuse and Child Neglect, and to rescind policy JH entitled Student Welfare, Reporting Child Abuse Reporting.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Discussion. Fisher.
We were first, as Mr. Trotta indicated, told by the state that we needed to add human trafficking and child pornography to our policy. So that's why we sat down to begin with to look at this policy in order to get it in place as soon as we could, as the new school year was beginning. And that's when we had our discussion also of expanding this to cover all school employees. Part of our discussion at that time was that it's not just teachers or principals that might happen to notice or hear something about a child being abused or neglected, but certainly bus drivers, lunch people, nurses, whatever. And therefore, we decided that it should be expanded to cover all those employees. It gives us, gives children better protection. There's more ears and eyes out there to determine then the child abuse, if there is any child abuse or neglect going on. I think if you compare the old policy to the new policy, I think you'll see a lot of improvements between those two policies, not just in explanation of the background and definitions, but in meeting the new state regulations as well.
Thank you for that clarification. Other comments, questions? Mrs. Williams.
I'm realizing this is first read, and this will go back to the committee. I'd like to suggest that under purpose, the 3 lines beginning with all school system employees, I think that reads as a policy statement. And the as soon as possible, I would like to suggest that that be changed to immediately. On 4, policy statement and procedures, I'd like to see what was in the purpose, those last 3 lines, inserted before A as the policy statement. And I think A, that particular section needs some work. The phrase have an obligation, I think.
Mrs. Williams, excuse me, I'm lost. Where are we, 4A at this point?
Yes, we're at 4A on page 2 of 3.
Okay.
Obligation to report, where it says all school system employees have an obligation. I would like that to say all school system employees are to report suspected child abuse or neglect, as opposed to have an obligation. It's a policy. I'd like it to say they are to report suspected child abuse or child neglect. It doesn't say when. Again, I think it's important to say immediately. And then I have a question with regard to the statement supervisors are to provide employees with information on what action is to be taken in the event an employee suspects child abuse or child neglect. In the sentence above, it says that the school system the school system employee who's doing the reporting is to notify the Department of Social Services or law enforcement and the supervisor. Do they wait for the supervisor to inform them of the action to take? I think that whole section is a little
There's
ambiguous.
a real reason for that.
Okay, I'm anxious to hear it.
I'm sure you are. Mr. Trotter or Mrs. Fisher, you want to tackle that one?
Go ahead.
Okay.
We were fortunate enough to be provided with some information about the process that the Department of Social Services follows with regard to an individual reporting suspected child abuse or child neglect. And what we've learned is that the person who actually hears the comments or observes a student who might appear to have been abused or neglected, that person must actually make the call, and that they will not take proactive action if it's someone reporting, calling them, that someone else told them that a child was abused or neglected. So that was the purpose of the first sentence. There was some discussion that since we're expanding this requirement to individuals who in the past have not had this responsibility and are not mandated by law to do so, that the supervisor of that individual should be prepared to provide guidance just in case that individual has a question. I believe that our certificated staff is well versed in what they're required to do, but for individuals, this is going to be something new to them. So I think we can go back to the policy committee and maybe look at that wording a little bit, but that was the rationale behind sentence number 1 and sentence number 2. And maybe we can do some better connection between the two concepts, but that was the thinking.
That was the thinking. Thank you.
Also, the word immediate, we have quite a discussion over that. And if this person who's going to do the reporting or should do the reporting is being held by law and can, if you read to the very bottom of this, even lose his or her job over it, we want to make sure that they're not going to lose it because they couldn't do it immediately. We don't want the bus driver to stop with a busload of kids because she just heard the little girl behind her say something about being abused, meaning she would have to stop the bus right then and there and make a phone call and do what's necessary to report it. So we changed it to as soon as possible. Maybe we could say immediately or as soon as reasonably possible. There are some situations which would prevent a person from doing it that very moment because they have other legal responsibilities in front of them. But we had a really lengthy discussion on immediate.
I understand the difference between right that moment and as soon as possible could be a very lengthy period of time, and when you're dealing with a situation like this, I would rather err on the side of let's do it immediately.
We tried to come up with some other word and we couldn't find another word that
I understand.
did it.
And again, we're including a much larger universe of employees who will now be responsible for this, much more than the state law requires. So we were trying to be respectful of the responsibilities of a variety of individuals who may not have access to a telephone. They may need to get there, and if someone interprets an hour later as not immediately, does that cause some liability for that person? And an employee's job is on the line here. So, all right, other comments? Thank you for those. Questions, comments on this? And again, it is a first reading, and it'll be going back to the policy committee. And we look forward to any public comments on this. All right, the motion is, it's on Mrs. Fisher's motion. All those in favor? Looks like 7-0. Student concurs. Thank you. One more.
Yes, thank you. The Board of Education's Human Resources Committee forwarded a new policy to the Policy Committee for its consideration. This new policy, which is entitled Diversity, makes it clear that the Board of Education is committed to providing all the members of the school community with a supportive environment that fosters a culture of diversity and inclusion. The Policy Committee endorsed the recommendation of the Human Resources Committee and offered very minor stylistic changes to the new policy. The Policy Committee is recommending the approval of the first reading of this new policy entitled Diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trotta. One more motion there, Mrs. Fisher.
Madam President, I move to approve the first reading of proposed policy GBA entitled Diversity.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Mrs. Fisher, would you like to take first comment?
I think Human Resources has done a very good job putting this policy together. I think it fits right in with our committee that's working on diversity and our attempts to provide more diversity in the eyes of our children so that they see that all kinds of people are accepted and all kinds of people have value to offer and to set examples for various students and so on. As Mr. Trotta said, we only made a few minor changes. They didn't change meaning anywhere. They were just to realign some things perhaps a little better. So I'm hoping that my fellow board members will accept this important policy.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Other comments, questions? Mr. Gessford.
just have a question why we would change embraces and encourages and change it to welcomes individuals.
Mrs. Bright?
Embraces,
Yes.
welcomes is
Hardings.
an action.
I was the one who suggested that change, and the reason was I didn't want the use of the word encourages to be misunderstood. I thought the purpose was that we welcome people into our community of all different types of points of view. Somebody could interpret encourages as, are we encouraging people to
So how do you encourage a difference?
how do you encourage a gender identity? How do you encourage a ethnicity? I just didn't think that word fit.
Yeah, it was,
So that's why I suggested welcomes, because I thought it fit the spirit of what I thought the policy should be. But that was my thinking. I only provide that as way of background.
Did that help with your question, Mr. Guest, for a follow-up?
Well, yeah, follow-up. I guess the thing here is, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I thought the board, basically says we welcome, we embrace, and we want to encourage people to accept the differences. And we will work together to find a way to get through that. I guess maybe I'm just looking at, maybe the definition's a little bit different for me. But I think I would encourage my and staff to find ways to work among the people. And you kind of take that out if you're just saying you just welcome individuals. That's just my opinion.
Mrs. Fisher.
well, first of all, I was going to suggest that maybe this is a first read also. Mr. Guessford, if you come up with another suggestion before policy committee meets again, we certainly consider it. I don't think we would want to say keep encourages, because if you read down through the rest of the policy, encourage doesn't mean you will accept. It means we would like you to accept. And the rest of this policy basically says you will accept. That's our policy, is that diversity is accepted. It's not just encouraged to be accepted.
Mrs. Brightman?
Yes.
Just
Hardings.
following up, I appreciate the
sorry.
suggestion, Mr. Guessford. I think what you're saying is exactly the spirit of what I was trying to get at. And I'd be glad, as a policy committee, to rework that in that spirit. As it was originally written, it was the Board of Education encourages differences in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. What we mean is encourages people to accept differences in. And I think that's a difference that I didn't phrase it maybe the way you did, but I think we're saying the same thing. So
Right.
why don't we take a look at it?
That'd be good.
Thanks for that.
Yep.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes, I kind of played along with that as well. And since the committee is going to take a look at it, I'd like to suggest the inclusion of something along the lines of the Board of Education appreciates the value in having a diverse school community, or the Board of Education sees value in a diverse school community, and
Including
the rest of it.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, the question is on Mrs. Fisher's motion. All those in favor of this first read? 7-0. Student concurs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trotta, Mrs. Francisco. Consideration of the consent agenda. Ms. Freeman, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. 6 action items are before the board this afternoon for your consideration. Most significantly on the agenda, the first 2 items are to renew the bid that the board approved last year for the purchase of school buses we need for delivery in the spring, in anticipation of transporting students for the 2016-2017 school year. So we're ahead of the curve on that and getting that order processed. We also have on the agenda for your consideration some technology purchases, and I've provided you with a great bit of detail here, which I hope has been helpful to you in making your recommendation. The Procurement Review Committee has discussed these bids and is recommending we go forward and make these purchases at this time.
Thank you. And by the way, if we haven't said before, the background information that we receive in our packet is very helpful. So thank you for that. Looking for a motion on this consent agenda.
Madam President, I move to approve the following. The bid renewal procedures for the purchase of 15 school buses in total for the 2016-17 school year to American Bus at $1,436,055. Approval of the sale of up to 17 used school buses to highest bidders using government gov deals or request for quotation. Purchase of 91 laptop computers to HCGI at $60,060. Laptop computers and devices to Apple Inc. at $43,936.90. And desktop computers and monitors to CDW-Government at $36,458.69.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Excuse me. Second?
Second.
Dr. Hardings. Okay. Open for discussion. Questions on these items?
Mrs. Brightman?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask the same question about the desktop computers as I asked last time. Is this part of a evaluation of that program and process, and have we determined that this is the best required technology for this particular application, and how does it fit into our overall technology plan?
Welcome, Mr. Corns.
Afternoon. After looking over the specifications that were required by the Career and Technology, sorry, caught me flat-footed. The Career and Technology Ed, where we're doing AutoCAD and Autodesk Inventor, we went back to their specs and pulled the desktop units out for the use of those. They tend to need an external monitor, so there's not a portability that would make more sense, Dr. Harding.
They need an external monitor? You can't do AutoCAD on a laptop?
Well, we have larger monitors than would be expected for a normal application because of the layout size. So we have either 19 to 21 inch monitors on these devices.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional question? You're good? Okay, others? Okay, I had one just generally about the buses. There's 3 items on here, a notice of sale and then 2 items of renewals on 12 buses. Is it a total 11 and 4, correct? Help me understand, and somewhat for the public as well, did we just extend get a waiver from the state on extending the year limitation on some buses, or am I misremembering that?
A number of years ago, the board asked us to try to look at a situation that occurred where in one year I think we purchased 28 buses all at once, and then we were buying 4 buses and those kinds of things. So we've been looking at a way to level off our bus purchases. So we've been trying to kind of hit this 15 mark and not get higher than that. There'll actually be some years we might even be lower than the 15-year mark. To do that, we played with a 13th and 14th year, and now the state has actually extended that to a 15th year as a result of some of the counties, particularly on the eastern shore, that don't use salt or particularly the liquefied material they're putting down now, which we're finding to be very, very corrosive to our vehicles, not only the buses, but also the cars and vans and trucks. I would say to you personally, if you have a vehicle and you drive through that state, where they're putting those stripes down the road, advice on my newer truck from one of our garage people is go get the undercarriage of your truck washed as soon as it dries up. It is very, very corrosive. And so what we've been doing is playing with that 13th, 14th, and now even a 15th year. When appropriate, we're selecting the best possible bus, maybe to extend and to keep our bus purchases level. So we do work with the state to just make a request. Dr. Wilcox has signed off on a couple of those requests.
I think we all just received a letter, so that's what I was referencing and how that worked here. Okay. So that replacement schedule just keeps going out every
We
8 or
evaluate
10 or 12 a year?
Well, every year we reevaluate the condition of our buses and things. Potentially next year we might have a year when we won't have to order 15. It might be as low as 10 or 11. We'll have to monitor and see what other conditions come up with pre-K and opportunities like that, if any additional magnet. We're using some resources with our students in transition. They're called SIT students now, homeless children. So they're taking up some resources, but we're hoping to, have a year maybe we don't have to order 15. Then there's an out year about 6 or 7 years out, which will be an opportunity for us either to pick up additional buses or have another year where we might only order 4 or 5 buses. But again, we're working with that 13th, 14th, 15th year to kind of push and play with the buses in the best condition to push out a year or 2 or 3 to even out our purchases.
And we have to reapply each year, correct?
We have certain conditions. After we meet it in that 13th year, the 14th and 15th year, we've kind of made the investment at that point. We just have to make sure the state's aware that we're asking for a 14th and 15th year.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Additional questions or answers? Okay, Mr. Ridner's motion is on this consent agenda. All those in favor? 7-0, student concurs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. South, fourth quarter and year-end, FY 2015 budget adjustments.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board. I am here with the requested fourth quarter or year-end fiscal year 2015 budget adjustments. And as you're aware, the Annotated Code of Maryland requires that at each year-end, each LEA must align its budget with its actual revenues and expenditures. So that is what I'm here with this afternoon, a request to align the budget with the actual revenues and expenditures for FY15. You've had the opportunity to review the document in your packet. So as usual, I won't go over every item, but there's just a couple things I'd like to bring to your attention. First of all, line 2, the administration category, savings there of about $505,000, and that resulted from lower than expected cost of the new financial and HR software. Down in instructional salaries, line 4, about half of that savings of $579,000 is due to savings in instructional substitutes, which is good news because that means that our A-team is in front of our students more often than not. Other instructional costs, you see there are savings of about $404,000. That's savings from discontinuation of the Agile Minds and a more favorable copier lease contract that we entered into over the past year. I did miss line 5. I apologize. $1.3 million there related to some deferred purchases in the areas of textbooks, materials, and computers. Special education, approximately $355,000 in savings. About half of that was related to non-public placements. So good news in that area of special education. Fixed charges, you'll see we had a savings of $849,000 and some change, and that related primarily to the medical insurance premium holiday that the board declared back in December. All of that brings us down to a net increase in the fund balance of $4.4 million. And at this point, these requested fourth quarter budget adjustments have been vetted through the Finance Committee at their meeting on the 25th of this month, 25th of August. And that committee recommended that these budget adjustments be forwarded to the full board with a recommendation for approval. At this time, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. South. This requires a motion. Mr. Gesford is chair of that committee. Would you like to go with it?
Yes, I move to approve the proposed fiscal year 2015 fourth quarter budget adjustments.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gesford, it's your motion. Any comments?
I don't have any comments. I do have a few questions for, all right. I noticed here on the administration that we had for the full year, $1,000,008. And I looked back over the last 3 years, and I'm noticing that there's a continuous savings in that field. Is there a reason why we're continually having that type of number in the administration?
I don't have the 3-year adjustments in front of me. I do have the this year, and I do know that last year there was a significant save that was booked also as related to the ERP software, as that was a 2-year purchase. So there was some savings booked there also. I don't have the exact numbers. So I'm not prepared with prior year numbers.
Fiscal year 13, we were at 560,000, and then in 14 we had an overage of 1.5. Then this year we had an overage of 1.8. Those numbers are being budgeted, and I was wondering if I guess that's correct. Are we budgeting those numbers, and we're just kind of finding that we have extra at the end of the year?
There was synergy to Tyler for the savings of the two.
That's the two that...
Synergy would have been the year before that then, would have been...
Okay. Then in the mid-level administration, I'm seeing the same thing, a large surplus of monies across the board for those 3 years. In 2013, we had over $1 million, and then on the 2014, we just had 273, and then this year we had 402,000.
Mr. Gesford,
Yes.
can I interrupt just a
Yes,
moment?
you can.
I apologize. I guess I'm a little confused that the motion is on the fourth quarter and the discussion is on the final, and I think we're all happy to discuss past years, and I'm just curious if that's something we can you could take to your finance committee.
Just wondering if there's a reason for that before I vote on it. That's all for this year. If there's just an answer, and I got the first one.
That information would drive your vote this evening.
Yes, it would.
Okay.
We would be happy to do an analysis of any of the 3 years that any of the board members have a question about, but I apologize, I don't normally bring that information with quarterly budget adjustments. I don't have that information this evening here at the table.
Is there something?
I think you can, Chris, I mean, generally, because I think that's what Mike's looking for, is that the first year there was savings as a result of our conversion to Synergy, because we budgeted $3 million. We spent about $1.5 million. We thought that the Tyler application would cost about $3 million. It did not. It cost about $1 million plus. I can't remember what the number was. And mid-level administration, 2012, is after the reorganization that we did, where we reduced the overall administrative size, if you'll remember. And then the last year was probably a combination of a number of vacancies, including
Dr. Marco.
Dr. Marco was gone for a significant period of time, and I believe we had several other smaller vacancies. So I think that's where that mid-level...
That's exactly that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yep, that's great.
Thank you. Okay. Any other, Mr. Gesford,
Nope.
any comments about discussion in the Finance Committee before this goes forward?
We're good.
Okay, additional questions, comments from any member? Okay, I believe this is Mr. Gesford's motion. All those in favor? 7-0, student concurs. Thank you. And Mr. South, you can stay right there, and we'll move into the budget calendar.
Yes, ma'am. Also at the 8/25 Finance Committee. We also reviewed the Washington County Public Schools draft fiscal year 2017 general fund budget calendar. As you're well aware, the board policy requires that each year the board approve a calendar of milestones for preparation of the budget for the coming year, and that's what I'm bringing to you this afternoon. This calendar was created using the same format that we used for fiscal year 2016's calendar. If you recall, the Finance Committee made a recommendation in that year to have a firm line of demarcation between when the budget was the superintendent's budget and when it actually became the board's budget. And that line of demarcation is noted in this budget as of the end of February, because as of March the 1st, the board will adopt the budget as its draft budget in order to take that to public hearing. As usual, all of the dates after January in this budget are predicated upon the timely receipt of the state aid reports from MSDE. This calendar is similarly predicated from January forward. We do anticipate this year that we'll receive the state aid report on or around the 19th of January, so that is noted in this budget also. Additionally, there are 2 opportunities for work sessions, one on the superintendent's draft budget, which is scheduled for the 2nd of February, another which would be a work session on the board's budget would be scheduled for the 15th of March. That is just 1 week after the board hears the public comment in public hearing and also hears the Budget Advocacy and Review Committee's recommendation on the FY17 budget. As you recall, last year we had 3 opportunities for work sessions, and the board, I think, eliminated one. As always, we can adjust this calendar at a later time if the board does see fit that it needs another opportunity for a 3rd work session. That brings us down to the moving the budget to the Board of County Commissioners for approval, and that is scheduled for either the 22nd or the 29th of March. Normally what happens is we put 2 dates in there, and then I will contact, once the board approves the calendar, I will contact the county, let them know those 2 dates, and then we'll try to work out something with the commissioners, given that we have 2 dates to work with. All of that being said, as I mentioned, this calendar was vetted through the Finance Committee on the 25th of August, and they recommended bringing it to the full board for your approval.
Thank you, Mr. South. Mr. Gessford, would you like the honors?
Yes, I move to approve the fiscal year 2017 budget calendar.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Questions, comments on the calendar? Mrs. Williams.
Mr. South, you said last year we had scheduled 3 work sessions. How many work sessions did we actually have last?
I believe you had 2 last year.
We had 2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and as you mentioned, there's a demarcation. It's the superintendent's budget up until February 24th, and then it becomes the board's budget.
Yes, ma'am.
March 1st. So I would think it would be reasonable to think that when it is the board's budget that we could have a work session. So I'd like to suggest that we strike if needed and plan to have that work session, and if we decide that in fact it's not needed, we could cancel it. But I would like to plan to have that work session. I know this past year there were at least 3 board members who asked to have that optional budget work session, and that didn't happen. And so I would like to know that we have the amount of time in work session that we feel as board members that we need. So I would like to see if needed.
Do I hear
Mark
an
through.
amendment to the motion?
I can do that, Madam President.
Yes,
ma'am. Madam President, I move to amend the draft FY 2017 General Fund Budget Calendar to read budget work session
date?
for the March 15, 16 deliverable date.
So you're asking the if needed to go away and
Yes,
just
ma'am.
leave budget work session?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, everyone understand the amendment before us, and is there questions or comments? All those in favor of the amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ridenour, did you?
No, I will make the statement. I fail to see the necessity. Budget work session, if needed, it's already there. If we need it, we need it. If we don't use it. I mean, the date is set aside for a work session. You look at that, if during the course of the time of running up to the 15th, it's determined by the majority of the board that this is unnecessary, we are where we need to be, then we move forward. It moves forward to the next day or the next step or whatever the case might be. So I fail to see the necessity of taking that word out. We've had 2 budget work sessions ahead of that time. The third one, if it's needed, we'll have it. We've had it in the past. There have been times when we've had more than 2 as a result of, typically it's because of tight budgetary season or budgetary situation. I don't see the necessity of changing anything. If we need it, we'll have it. If we don't, we don't.
Mrs. Williams.
I'm sorry, I'm missing the second work session that you say we're having. I see one when it's the superintendent's budget on February 2nd. Where is the second one? Am I missing that?
There are 2 work sessions, one on the 15th of March and one on the 2nd of February. There were 3 in the calendar last year, and the
Okay,
board
Mr.
removed 1.
Excuse me.
That's where the
Mr.
3
Reitner just said
That's where
there
the
were
3
2.
came from. There was
Sorry,
3
my
last year.
apologies.
So
The
there's
board
only,
removed 1 last year, so we used the same format that the board used last year, and that was to have 2.
okay.
So
Mr.
there's only
Reitner-
2 in this calendar.
But one is marked if needed.
Yes,
Is
ma'am,
that
that's
correct?
correct.
The second.
So
That's correct.
As opposed to what Mr. Reitner said, as 2 were scheduled, correct?
He corrected his
Okay,
statement,
so
Mrs. Williams.
thank you. I would like to see, if needed, removed, that we plan to have the work session, and if we don't need it, then we cancel it. It's already on the calendar, and people can plan for it.
Any other discussion on this amendment to the budget calendar as recommended by the Finance Committee? Okay, the question is on Mrs. Williams' amendment. All those in favor? 4 in favor. Those opposed? 3 opposed. Student concurs with the minority. So we are now talking about the amended budget calendar. Any further questions or comments on the calendar? I have one on the January 29th where we send the superintendent's draft budget to this board, to the Budget Advisory Review Committee and the County CAC. I know that we get a report out from the Budget Advisory Committee officially prior to our public hearing, as we have in the past. I don't see anywhere in the calendar that we actually hear back from CAC. Is it in writing? Is it public? It seems like we could couple that with the BARC. Or am I missing that?
The CAC does have a member on the BARC, and that individual normally carries the information back to the CAC, but I don't believe the board has ever had a formal report from the CAC that I can recall.
We haven't, and I guess, again, I consider them separate citizen advisory committees and feel like they may have a different approach, that it may be informative if those 2 units stood separately and reported separately. So I will extend that. I can't make a motion. Someone who agrees with that, can they put that out there? Isn't that terrible? The chair is in a position here.
Would you be so kind as to restate what it is you're suggesting?
I'm going to give up the chair so I can make the motion. You now have the chair. I'm allowed to do that.
Okay.
All right. I would like to amend the calendar that we have a report from CAC at the same time that we have a report from the BARC.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Brightman, seconded by Mrs. Harshman. Is there any discussion?
I think I've explained my intent with the motion.
Mrs. Harshman?
I have a question about the length of time that they have the budget before responding. This says 129, and our work session is it's February 2nd. Does that leave them enough time to respond to us?
I think they would be responding at the same point that the BARC does, which is at the public hearing, which is in March.
Yes.
So that would give them about 6 weeks.
So we would not have to have any of their input for the work session, the first work session.
I just see it as two different committees giving a report at the same time.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on Mrs. Brightman's amendment? If not, the questions on Mrs. Brightman's amendment. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 6-1. The student member concurs.
Thank you. And the chair reclaims the chair. Thank you. We're now looking at the original amended budget calendar. Any additional questions, comments? And I believe that was made by Mr. Gesford. So the question is on his motion, the amended calendar. All those in favor? 7-0, and the student concurs. Thank you, Dr. Hardings, for that assistance.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Mr. South. All right. We have now moved out of action items, and we're into the superintendent's report and an opening day report from Dr. Pugh. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll be quick. We had a great time going out visiting the schools. All of the Division of Instruction divided up and went to visit every single school, which was, for me, a treat, starting in Hancock and working my way back. We wanted to share with you some of the observations we made. As one would expect and what we anticipated at the beginning of the year, there were some glitches with transportation and some minor things in terms of timing and students coming to school not fully enrolled with all of the correct paperwork. But the atmosphere and the welcoming that we felt by the school staffs at the schools was a really positive experience for all of us. They were amazed at how the bus drivers knew which sibling they had and which sibling they didn't have, and they were waiting for them. And all of the students knowing exactly what bus they were on by the color animal that they had, and custodians welcoming everybody out on the front, making sure that students could get where they were. That was quite a thing to see across all of the schools. Parents walking their children into the schools, excited for the beginning of the year. And we were also able to see our students welcoming new students into the school, making sure they could get to their lockers and just felt comfortable. And then we were privileged to actually see some beginning instruction, helping kids to begin the routines and have some input on how their classroom was actually going to run. So we wanted to share that with you. I also have for you, you'd asked to follow up with our survey on professional development. We had initially done a survey that really asked level 2 and level 4 questions on Guskey's rating of professional development, because you want professional development to actually impact what happens in the classroom. So one of the things that we did not do that you'd asked that we do is go back and ask some of the level 1 questions about the venue and about the parking and about, you know, the conditioning of the rooms, and really give people an open area to give feedback. So we did an anonymous survey for all of the venues. All teachers could participate. They didn't have to participate, where we asked them the 5 questions that you'll see on the slides. And you can see that the majority of people agreed or strongly agreed that it was a beneficial experience to them, that the venue supported the learning, the objectives were clear, the content was relevant, yet only half, or 52%, felt that it would actually help them do their job better.
I apologize. We're not getting any of the slides.
Oh.
Oh, well, get him out.
They're working on it.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
Thank you.
It's Jamie's fault. We'll just.
I'm
let it
looking
go.
at it.
We'll
You
let
want
it
me
go
to
with
turn this
that.
around? What I will do is send this to you so that you can have time, and then I'll be available to answer questions once you actually have a chance to look at the information. I wanted to share with you the same thing in secondary, that they had a majority of folks were positive about the feedback and felt that it was relevant, but in terms of will it help them do their job, they were not everyone was able to see that connection. We dug a little deeper into each location, and South Hagerstown High School was one of our areas that we want to take a bigger look at for the future. Some of the feedback shared that they only 35% of those who attended felt that it was beneficial, and the same percent felt that it would help them to do their job. We did anticipate that some staff would have discomfort when they weren't actually handed a curriculum and a scope and sequence as they're used to doing and permitted to work on it, knowing concretely exactly what they were to cover. But this will continue to be a challenge as we're making substantive changes in the content, because our new standards demand it and because our students deserve it. It's going to be a steep learning curve as we engage in this backwards design model, or an understanding-focused curriculum that is different from just coverage-based. Coverage-based is comfortable. It's what we've always done and what our teachers are familiar with. So we started with language that would help them to begin to understand the processes. And as we dig deeper into it, we know it's going to be challenging for our teachers. We will continue to dig into the data, and we'll ask those questions each time we have a professional development opportunity to determine where the barriers lie and where we can work to help teachers understand and begin to work with us. So, excellent. You'll see that the majority of teachers gave suggestions. Majority of teachers who gave suggestions were categorized in these 5 areas, from the facility recommendations to I absolutely did not have a good experience, I learned nothing new, to appreciative comments and suggestions for future days, along with technology recommendations about how we could maybe do this in a virtual format that would be easier on the teachers. These were some of the larger categories of future adjustments. Elementary locations asked that we make sure that they have chairs large enough for adults in the elementary locations. They also wanted to make sure that we had enough technology in the common areas, and that some people said it was too hot, some people said it was too cold, and that there was too many people at Rockland Woods, which we have planned to address in the future so that we separate out those grades. They also asked that we model some of the tools that we were giving the teachers to use, such as the Google Classroom, which would allow them to stay in their rooms and still participate in the activities. They wanted small group discussions. They also wanted it to be flexible so that perhaps we did directed learning in the morning and then allowed them time to process in the afternoon, and that we would consider the stress of the fact that it's opening of school. So we'll continue to ask for that type of feedback, and we'll continue to respond and plan using that data. And I just wanted to let you know that we did follow up. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pugh. Dr.
Thank you.
Wilcox?
Well, I think we're going to turn this over to Mr. Michael, Dr. Michael, and Mr. Rollins. Thank you, Peggy.
I could talk about healthcare, but I don't think I'd be an expert on that topic today.
Not quite there yet.
There we go.
Okay, good afternoon, President Brightman, members of the board, Dr. Wilcox. We're excited today to bring forward some additional information about our academic hub. Today, we're just making a presentation on behalf of the superintendent as a report. We anticipate, and we'll wrap this up towards the end of our presentation, to bring back, ask for a formal vote from the board on September 22nd, if all continues to go according to plan. We've been working on the hub now for well over a year. Some of it's been in conversation, some's been in kind of a topic. What about this? Could we build a hub? Could there be something downtown? It's hard to believe that more than a year's worth of time has already gone by. Officially on March 24th, we did receive a proposal from the Bowman Development Corporation. We refer to as BDC. As the board worked through some of that on April 21st, you're aware that you passed a resolution directing the superintendent to take some specific action. Part of that action was to seek State Superintendent Lowry's permission to pursue the unsolicited proposal concept and an academic hub downtown and potentially alternative financing. Also with that, we did solicit, put out an RFP requesting other proposals. We did receive an additional proposal from Hager 5 LLC. Very viable proposal, very exciting proposal, much like the BDC proposal. Had a bridge, you may recall that was in the paper, an article is a bridge coming from the old Susquehanna Bank and some other properties there to the Barbara Ingham School building, and it was a very attractive design. As we received that document, we pushed back with questions to both groups, Bowman Development Group and Hager 5 LLC. We received responses to those questions. We then conducted formal process interviews, and then we gave both of those groups an opportunity by August 7th to submit their best and final offer. Both groups submitted their best and final offer on August 7th, and then our committee met again on August 12th to evaluate those proposals. Just a brief summary of the Bowman Development Group proposal. It's located immediately adjacent to the Barbara Ingham School for the Arts, between Barbara Ingham School for the Arts and the Maryland Theater. There are proposals between a 51 and 52,000 square foot building. Of course, all this is conceptual. It'll probably give or take a little bit as we get into the design for a 5-story building. The proposal met the requirements and expectations as identified, again, about a year ago from our instructional department. How many classrooms, how many science labs, how much administrative space, how much additional future expansion space might we need for not only the Barbara Ingham School for the Arts students, but for other boutique schools that might be located in downtown Hagerstown at some point. The entire structure that they're proposing is new construction, and they did offer 8 different options of payment plans, both not only for the construction of the project or potential of lease or purchase of the property. Those range between approximately $15 million and $22 million plus. And the reason I say $22 million plus, the one proposal after 10 years was an opportunity to renegotiate on the lease for 10 more years, so we don't have an exact number, but approximately 22 million was one of the proposals, and then a little bit more than that is likely the 8th proposal. The Hager 5 proposal was up on West Washington Street, located between 43 and 59 West Washington Street Street. Combination of several different buildings. It was for a proposal of approximately a 50,000 square foot building, 3 stories, with the opportunity for some expansion space, about 10,500 square feet of expansion space for in the future. It again had classrooms, science rooms, cafeteria, administrative spaces, and did meet the requirements of the RFP. It was a mixture of new construction. Some of the building would be completely new, and some of it would be renovated, and actually part of a condo arrangement over a portion of the building on a 2nd and 3rd floor area for part of the structure. They offered 3 payment plans, ranging again from approximately $15 million up to about $25 million or slightly over $25 million. And all those plans include the condo lease from what we could understand in their proposal. Prior to reviewing the proposals and assigning any point value, a rubric was established and point values determined for each of the pieces of the RFP. The The information identified in the rubric was clearly identified not by point, but by topic in the RFP. It was made very clear that proximity to Barbara Ingram, student safety, those types of things would be very important in the selection of the appropriate proposal. And that list was there on the screen. As we get down to our determination from the committee, we've determined that our recommendation is going to be for the Bowman Development Corporation, scoring 96 points. The Hager 5 LLC proposal, again, I do want to say that it was an excellent proposal. We saw great value and benefit to it. A real challenge to that proposal in their final submission for August 7th was that bridge that was originally proposed in their design. They indicated that at this time they would not be able to build the bridge, which created kind of a safe corridor for our students, not only in the sense of being isolated within our building and us to be able to maintain control, but also just to walk in the rain, the wind, snow, those types of things, and behind the other buildings. So that really, from the instructional staff, when they shared their opinions during the committee meeting, without that bridge, it really changed the nature of the proposal and the values reflected in the score. So they scored 83 points. Again, proximity, student safety, overall condition of the property, adequacy of program space. Both proposals met program space at a minimum. There was an edge to the Bowman proposal. And then long-term operating costs were discussed. As we started thinking about, as the buildings were contained, almost self-contained side by side, could we minimize administrative costs, custodial costs, even costs allowing people in and out of the building, security costs, those types of things, rather than two different structures separated by 180 feet. So the recommendation will come forward based on the superintendent's recommendation in the committee on September 22nd. We'll be seeking your approval of a resolution to enter into a contractual agreement with the Bowman Development Group to construct the academic hub with certain conditions. And many of those conditions will involve state approvals, county approvals, funding approvals, necessity of the Bowman Group to meet their obligations as we pull this all together. Also, the committee would like to recommend option B as part of the Bowman proposal. It's for a guaranteed maximum price of $14,050,000. There is an opportunity, the way the Bowman plan is designed, they're going to go out to bid to 3 or 4 selected contractors. If they receive savings in those bids, then Washington County Public Schools will get to gain the benefit of those savings as well. So it's possible that while we have a ceiling price, that it won't be any more than $14,50,000. We do have an opportunity that it could be cheaper, and/or there are also going to be some alternatives as part of the bid. We may be able to take some of the savings, if there's savings, and select alternatives. We may opt to select some of the alternatives if the pricing is too good to turn down. Additionally to option B, option 3, in regards to the ground lease or ground purchase, staff and the superintendent's recommending the outright purchase of the property for $900,000. As we look at our next steps, obviously a big one is to secure funding. The first one being to secure funding from our own fund balance. I think there'll be discussion in the coming board meetings. I know that there's, I believe, $2 million set aside, or a portion of the $4 million set aside at this time. So we'd want to secure the balance of that from the board in a dedicated fund out of the fund balance for the academic hub. Pursue the county commissioners for $4 million payment towards this project, and also secure the equivalent of a loan to be repaid to the Board of County Commissioners in the amount of $6 million. The city, there's been discussions both with the county commissioners about potential commitment and the city. The city's commitment, we were requesting $1.5 million. Again, that goes back almost a year ago. That was first shared with them, that we'd be seeking something like that. That remains the consideration at this time. We put a placeholder in here for the Board of Public Works, meaning state money. Our recommendation would be to pursue the project, assuming that we would not receive state money, but that we also work on a parallel path, that if state money could be secured, and it would be beneficial to the project that we'd also do that, and that the board use that state money to help repay part of its $6 million commitment, at least as a consideration. So there's a number of governmental approvals that need to be sought throughout this process. We're behind the scenes going ahead and working on submitting our selection process, our rubric, all that needs to be submitted to the state for their review. There'd be quite a few submissions to the state regarding the design, those various things. Clearinghouse site approval if we do seek state funding. So a number of things will need to happen. And then obviously, after all those things are in place, that'll be further delineated in the resolution on the 22nd. There'd be a contractual agreement that would bring back to the board, which would actually be our final push and go commitment to the Bowman Development Group for this project. And with that, we'd be glad to entertain any questions that you might have. Also remind you that over the next 3 weeks, if you have questions, please report them to Dr. Wilcox or staff. We'll make sure that people get answers to questions. But today, we'd be glad to respond to any questions that we can today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Questions? Mrs. Hirschman.
I had a question about the Hager 5 presentation, and it said about the bridge that would connect from the bead company to BISFA was not possible. Did they explain why they could no longer provide the bridge?
One of our questions that we asked them, had they secured permission from all the various owners and right-of-ways that path would take for the bridge to connect from the bead building over to Barbara Ingram. That was one of the questions we asked during the interview. Part of their answer on August 7th was at this time it's not possible. They needed to cross one property that they couldn't secure at this time permission to cross.
Did they say why?
Well, I mean, each owner of the properties, just like, crossing your backyard, you decide you don't want a bridge across your backyard, you certainly, as the owner, have the right to say no. And I assume it was the owner's prerogative to say yes or no to the proposal. I can't elaborate beyond that.
That was just one that they ran up against.
They identified at least one. I don't know if they actually had permission from all the other property owners or not, but they did run into.
Also, I would like to thank you for saying proximity and not close proximity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Here's your English lesson for this evening, Dr.
Thank
Michael. Any other questions, comments?
I have a few.
Yes, Mr. Gesford.
I just noticed that in the document here, it says specifically excluded from the Project R, and there's a pretty long list of items there. I know that there are probably some add-ons. Do we have any type of dollar figures, or when will we get those that we'll know if we're going to add those on? Like, just for instance, an emergency generator. I mean, I think most schools have that.
Most schools have an emergency generator. I suspect in this project it'd be challenging to find a location for the emergency generator, the exhaust, location outside, that type of thing. So I think what that list was to make it clear what's excluded in their proposal. Their exclusions at this point are just identifying, just to make it clear to us what's not included. It does not negate that they met the requirements of the...
So that would be over and above the $14 million?
Correct. That is not in their guaranteed maximum price.
Also, a follow-up, the floors that are just going to be roughed in, I think it's the basement and the fourth floor.
Fourth floor would be the floor that would be unfinished. That would probably have a mechanical space and a space for some computer equipment that would come up. And then you would probably open the door, and what you basically see would just be an insulated room without drywall ceiling. It would have to be sprinkled. It'd have to meet fire code. It would have to have fire alarm, those types of things to meet code. But actually, it creates the flexibility and option for us as things develop. Do we need additional academic space? Do we want to put one of the boutiques in that area? Do we want to create a double-sized room? Do we want to create, a technology lounge? I don't know. It just creates a lot of flexibility for an unknown that we have at this point. It might even be that during the construction phase, things might change and develop, that we may choose to build out part of or all of that fourth floor, or Much like I've seen in some other buildings that have built expansion space, it might be years till we build that out.
But that's not included in that 14 million. That would be over and above the 14 million.
And that would be true of both proposals. Their expansion space and the other proposal, there'd be additional costs as well. However, the significant cost, and maybe I'll defer to Rob, the significant cost of that fourth floor would largely be included. Your HVAC type equipment would be sized to handle the fourth floor. The sprinklers would obviously be there. The structure, the floor, the superstructure, the whole room would be there, just not dividing walls, probably ceiling, those types of things. And those things aren't cheap, but they're relatively cheap once the floor is established.
In there. Well, on the fifth floor, by the drawing that I received, I counted up the seating, and it looks like there's about 180 seats available on the fifth floor. Knowing the fire department, because of a building that I purchased and did some renovation with, we had some issues. Do we know definitely that we can still seat that many students on the fifth floor?
All of that will require a code review as these documents are developed. Depending upon if we seek any state funding, will require MSDE review or DGS review, Department of General Services review, but definitely the fire marshal, code compliance people, and the Bowman Development Group is well aware of that. There are 2 stair towers. I mean, obviously we can't use the elevator during a fire alarm or fire emergency, but there are stair towers, and they calculate a flow of people and all those types of things. So that risk would be on the constructor, on Bowman Development, to ensure their design meets all that.
Still asking, Mr. Gessford?
You can come back to me.
That's fine. It was just Mrs. Williams.
Do we know of any buildings in the state of Maryland that house public school children that are 5 floors? Will this be the first? I mean, that 5 floors, I will admit, gives me concern.
I think I've seen some schools, and I could not name them by name, but in Baltimore City that definitely go 5 stories or more.
Okay.
I think that's probably safe to say, maybe at least 3, 4, 5 floors, because, you know, obviously they're building up. They have very limited space in some of the city areas. If you recall, most of our schools here in Washington County at one time were 3 or 4 floors.
Yeah. Dr. Michael, you mentioned the possibility of funds from the Board of Public Works. Can you give us some idea of, is there a range? I mean, I would think from 0 to what would be perhaps the greatest amount that we could expect if they would heed our request?
The greatest amount we could expect would be if we sought the state funding, full eligibility of state funding, which would be seeking 50% of the, or 71% is what our eligible funding would be based on the most recent information. However, that starts a whole series of other requirements, one being prevailing wage, which would probably significantly increase the cost and start to negate or offset, you know, our interest of pursuing state funds that way. Okay. Probably the most likely way that we would pursue state funding or possibility of state funding would be if you pursue less than 25% of the project of state funds involved, you do not have to abide by the prevailing wage laws. So we would seek maybe, if the math worked out right, 24.99% state funding develops towards eligible costs. They only pay for certain things. They will not pay for the purchase of the property. They won't pay for the architect fee. They won't pay for furnishing equipment, those types of things. So depending upon what that construction bid comes in and what items are eligible in that, let's say it's $12 million, and you know, we look for roughly a fourth of that from the state, maybe up to $3 million could be eligible. We would have to abide by MBE, Minority Business Enterprise bidding. In other words, we'd have to work with Bowman Development Group. They would have to require of their contractors are going to bid on the project to purposely and with all earnest seek minority business enterprise participants. Now, it's possible they won't find any, or they'll be too cost prohibitive and they could request a waiver, but we would have to abide by MBE rules. Another requirement we think we'd have to abide by, because it'd be owned by Washington County Public Schools in the end, regardless of whether we went with the outright purchase or the 20-year lease. If we secured state funds for this project, it would have to be LEED Silver. So we'd have to explore, do we have enough points already in the design? Are there some other low-hanging fruits that we can grab a hold of, some of which we control, green products, educational materials within the building, some of those types of things, that we can secure LEED Silver without increasing the cost beyond what would benefit us to receive state funds.
Thank you.
So again, that's why we would see pursuing a dual path. It would keep us on our timeline. It would keep things moving. And if we could secure state funding to our benefit, it certainly might be a possibility.
Thank you.
Mr. Gessford?
Have we looked into what if we would be exempt from the tax, real estate tax?
If we outright purchase the building, it would be, outright purchase the property, and we're basically paying someone to build the property, I would say yes, we are exempt from the tax. If we were leasing the property, the Bowman Development Group, and/or had we selected the Hager 5 Development Group, probably would be subject to the tax, at least for the 20-year period. But that would be all part of our lease arrangement and not really taxing us, but part of the cost of leasing the property.
But that would be above the 14 million.
Would not be above the 14 million. If we lease the property, that's embedded in the proposals that have been submitted. If we purchase the property, it's Board of Education property, much like Barbara Ingram, and we would not pay property tax. So there's no additional cost to us for the tax other than identified already in the prices here. And that would only be if we're leasing either option from the vendors.
It also lists here common areas, expenses that we would be responsible for.
That's in Hager 5.
Like you're referring to the Hager 5 proposal?
No. No, it's the Bowman project.
There are no common areas.
It will be the responsibility of the Washington County Public School Systems to pay all common area maintenance expenses. And it's also, it's on the bottom of, well, it's not listed, but page. Must be like the 4th page in. Do we have any kind of...
I think that is referring to if we were actually leasing the property. If we choose the option that we're recommending, then we would own the land and there would be no common area then. If we were leasing,
we would have
own the land and
responsibility
say
for
the
that.
plaza behind BISPA right now, they might have expected us to keep that clear.
Gotcha.
One thing maybe for clarity for the board, a lot of people think when we step out of the back of Barbara Ingram, that brick paved area, pavers I think are there, I don't think it's brick, pavers there in front of the plum, that area is owned by Washington County Public Schools. That's actually part of this Bowman property. It's kind of a little bit of a L shape, so it's that current building and then it comes across behind Barbara Ingram. So we actually have a right-of-way for students. They're well outside of our right-of-way when they leave the building often. But that, if we outright purchase the property, or I guess part of the lease agreement, would certainly clear that up.
Mrs. Brightman?
Yes, Dr. Hardings.
Just a few comments I'd like to make. First, I'd like to thank both parties for submitting proposals. Competition often goes a long way towards improving the product, and I think it's helped perhaps both parties sharpen their pencils a little bit. They have some competition out there. I certainly appreciate the thought, time, and expense that went in from both groups to providing us with two very good, viable proposals. So to both, thank you very much. This is, I think this is the way the process is supposed to work, as set up by the state with the RFP, et cetera. And I think the outcome shows the wisdom in the process that the state set up. So whichever direction the board chooses to go, to both parties, please know how much at least this board member appreciates the work that you put in. A couple other comments I'd like to make. If because we are starting a period of about 3 weeks' worth of public comment now that the staff's recommendation has been made, both proposals have been made public, and we have 3 weeks before we come back to vote on this. It's going to be a topic of discussion, and a couple of things I'd like to just point out as we do, as we go into that process. First, with the Barbara Ingram School, and I've mentioned this a year ago when we were originally discussing the idea, with the Barbara Ingram School and its 150 seats worth of capacity, the Public Service Academy with its, I don't know what that is, 45, 60 seats worth of capacity.
Over 100.
125, Rob? We figure SRC there to be.
I think it's about 108, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, 100 seats worth of capacity there. A few seats in this building, more than a couple of classrooms worth of opportunity in this building. You start to add those up, and you then add the academic hub, which would be roughly 350 or so seats. You're at about 600 seats or so worth of additional capacity that we've developed for high school students. That doesn't even mention the middle college, where we have students. They're not new seats we've created, but they are additional capacity for us to be able to serve the students that we're privileged to serve. So you add all that up, and that's 600 seats. That's a lot of capacity that I think we've generated both by work as a board and as a school system, and also in partnership with our other community partners on the Barbara Ingram School, the middle college, et cetera. And I bring that up because I think it demonstrates some of the savings long-term that we're able to generate in terms of construction as a group here. But I think it also goes to address something that I've started to hear sort of floating around, and frankly from some surprising places, which is that, oh, the board's going to build the hub, and then they're going to go right back to the county and ask for a high school. So I bring up those 600 seats as a way of explaining that that can't happen. And the reason it can't happen is for us to build a new comprehensive high school, especially if we want state funding for it, the state is going to look at all of the available capacity at the high school level before making a determination as to whether they will participate in building a high school in Washington County. And when they do that, they're going to count the seats at Barbara Ingram, the seats at the Public Service Academy, the seats at the academic hub. So by building the academic hub, we add seats to our inventory, which means that the state then, when they do that evaluation, is going to say, no, you have all these additional seats there. We're not going to participate in building a high school. So I guess that's a long way of saying that by making the commitment to build this facility, we force ourselves to put off the high school. Because if we tried to go and ask the state to participate in the high school, they would use the hub against us and say, sorry, you've got plenty of seats. So for those who think that we're going to build the hub or get the funding for the hub and then turn right around and ask the county for funding for a high school, we could ask, but the state's not going to participate because we have all these additional seats now. So I just wanted to put that out there as part of the conversation, because I know people are going to be discussing this over the next few weeks. And there are arguments for this project, there are arguments against it. But I don't think it's accurate or even within the state process fair to say that we could do this project and then turn right around and ask for additional funding for a high school. So just wanted to put that out there. I thank, again, both parties for their work on this. I thank the staff for doing a comprehensive job of writing the RFP, considering the original proposals that came in, really comprehensively evaluating the final proposals and bringing us your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Other questions?
Mrs. Brightman.
Yes,
This is
Mr.
not a
Breitauer.
question. It's not a question. Again, I want to echo what Dr. Hardings has said, and particularly took my thunder because, once again, something we've talked about for some time as a group. for years really was high school space. And, we have, as Dr. Harding has mentioned, over 500 plus seats if this comes to fruition, not just here, but all around, intelligently and uniquely in some cases. I will say there was a mention of a 5-story school. I think, Rob, you might be sure. I was looking at a picture just a second ago of the Baltimore School for the Arts, and I believe theirs is 5-story. Two side, and they are side by side. They just did a second renovation and addition not too long ago, so they're 2 4-story buildings side by side, very similar to what we're looking at if we move in the direction of the one particular proposal, the Bowman proposal. So this has been it's been tedious, I'm sure, for you guys, but by the same token, I think it's been a very good process because we're moving in a positive direction that could end up saving the county multi-millions of dollars. $15 million is a lot of money, but $85 million is an extraordinary amount of money, and that's what a new high school cost. So my congratulations to everyone who's been involved in this process. My thanks to the individuals who brought us a proposal. That both groups brought us 2 interesting proposals. And I am very hopeful that we can move forward, find financing one way or another, and get this completed because it will benefit us tremendously and our students tremendously. Offer opportunities to students to jump into those areas that they are passionate about. And we all know, if you really are into something, you want to be there. And you want to get, you want to be there as much as you possibly can. So thank you to everyone involved in this particular process.
Can I have a comment? Mr. Reidner, thank you. Any others? The chair would like to have a few questions, if possible, or comments as well, and then I think Dr. Wilcox would like to have a comment. A couple just specific questions and then a broader comment period. But I'm remembering in this proposal that the restaurant, the Plum downtown, there is some consideration for loss of business during the construction. Is that in this recommended proposal or the other one?
The Hager 5 proposal, there was, we shared a concern that during the construction of Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, we had to block off some of the back area. And that would likewise be true with the Hager 5 proposal, as they built that bridge through there and whatever. So in their proposal, they were proposing some compensation for the local business there. It's not in the Bowman proposal.
It's not in the Bowman, because I think, didn't we, sometime during our process with BISFA construction, work some arrangement with the Plum, or am I remembering that incorrectly? I thought we had given some compensation, some help with park. All right, then I'm wrong. That is, I think, a consideration, so I just put that out. The potential for connectivity with the Maryland Theater, where do we stand on that?
Way back in some of the designs we talked about, even designs that the board saw, I believe last October, November, December, sometime during that time frame, there was like a sketch of what maybe Maryland Theater might do. I don't think any of this precludes that from happening somewhere along the line. We have flipped the hallway to the other side based on the drawings right now. It might involve, if the 2 buildings are connected, the hallway might be on the Maryland Theater side, and then be a way to connect through the various floors. It's not part of the design right now. Our 2 timeframes for those projects aren't synced, but I don't think we're closing any future opportunity for that. It's just not part of the design. It's not purposely. There's not knockouts and those types of things to make that happen.
So the potential for bridging the alley, that's really not anywhere potentially that could move forward with that?
I don't think I don't want to speak for the Maryland Theater. I don't think they're ready to move forward at this point. We will not be interfering with the alley. There's no cantilevered part of this project, we went up a floor, and
Just wanting to
won't be
clarify
interfering with anything there, and it certainly would add some option there in the future.
I've had some questions from the public, so I wanted to pursue that. The way I look at this, very similar to several of my colleagues, but specifically to me, this is an expansion of the whole concept or the school system's commitment. I know some of us call it, I call it specialized instruction. And it's the idea that Public Service Academy, which I think will be a huge success and already is, Tech High, which is only one of 2 comprehensive high schools in the state that really have that AB day week where you have academic as well as your tech right there. We have standing room only for a lot of those programs. Again, very specialized, very student-driven, a real commitment to that. We look at Clear Spring High School with their ag and science, environmental science center, and their passion to make that the best in the state. And again, BISVA, which I first came on the board in 2007, about 3 weeks, I think, before we went to contract, or a very short time, and we were between different proposals then. Little did I know that a little over 8 years later, we'd be having some similar conversation. I do think it's important, as Dr. Hardings has pointed out, that this is not, in my mind, an expansion of BISVA. It's an expansion of opportunity. It's an expansion of specialized instruction. And what that looks like, I know our instructional team has many ideas as to where we can go with this. I know the Public Service Academy, those 108 or 10, are looking forward to having their academic classes downtown. Right now, they go back and forth to Tech. That would free up space at Tech. So this is sort of a domino where, again, it's to me, it's a very student-driven, student-centered education opportunity is what I see, and an additional investment, not a cost, but an investment in the future of our children. So I appreciate staff's work on this. I know it's been a long process, but it's been a very, I think, important process, and this takes us one step further. So again, this is just an informational report. We'll be back here in 3 weeks. Dr. Wilcox.
Well, thank you. The challenge when you're the superintendent and you wait till the very end, everything you say might have already been said. So I'm going to try to say something a little bit different. Beyond the thank yous to staff who have kind of had to change the way they view school construction to take a look at this. I want to thank Mr. Bowman and Bowman Development for being good partners throughout this process. I also want to extend my thanks to the team at Hager 5, who quite honestly made us rethink a lot of the ways that we were approaching this project. So my thanks to both of those organizations. I'm hopeful that the board will accept our recommendation going forward, but also I think it's important to note that sitting throughout this entire meeting has been the ownership team from the Plum. And I will tell you that I've had some considerations with Sarah telling her that we are sensitive to the fact that when the Barbara Ingram School was built, we nearly crippled her business. So we are going to proceed with a great deal of caution. We're going to think about Sarah and her team, but we're also going to think about some of the other businesses that are downtown when we begin this construction project. Because quite honestly, we want to be a part of a growing, thriving community. It will do us no good to go down there if what we end up doing is driving several other businesses out of the downtown area. So as we sit down and talk about our design and planning stages with Mr. Bowman and his team, we are always going to keep those local businesses that we will affect with our construction at the forefront of our mind. So, Sarah, I wanted to say that publicly, as I've said to you before in your office. But I also want to say to this board, thank you very much for allowing us to proceed through this process. One of the things that most people don't get to see are the conversations that we have behind closed doors relative to property acquisitions and development. And there is a great, I think, discussion that takes place behind closed doors so that we get to a point where we do things that are not only in the best interest of our students, but also are respectful of our taxpayers and our larger community. We know that we can't do this project without broader community support. We will begin to build that support in the next few weeks, speaking to whoever would like to speak to us, but in particular to the City Council of Hagerstown and to the county commissioners. That's consistent with the resolution that you provided me at some time not too long ago, and we'll continue to march on, but we will welcome any comments from community members or board members that will help us get to a better point on the 22nd when we ask you to approve this resolution. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay, and you have no additional updates? Just,
Mrs. Francisco.
yes. Thank you. Personnel action.
Mrs. Brightman, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board, as discussed in closed session earlier today, there are several personnel actions for your review and approval.
Thank you. A motion to approve personnel as recommended by staff.
Madam President, move for approval of the personnel recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. All those in favor of recommendation of personnel? 7-0, and the student abstains.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Francisco. Another excellent report.
She does that so well. Report to the board. Year end. Mr. South, update on Washington County Public Schools Self-Insurance Fund. I think the purpose of this is we'd had several questions in the community and some board members, and we thought it might be helpful to review how this works, and so we invited you to be with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a report that we have for about the last 5 years been doing publicly so that the public does understand how our self-insurance plan works, how it's funded, and where we stand, also not just for the public, but also for our employees who rely on our health insurance and dental insurance and so forth in their daily lives. So let me begin with just an overview of the self-insurance program, give you the status as of the end of this fiscal year, which was June 30, 2015. Little background information. Washington County Public Schools is self-insured for medical, surgical, prescription drugs, and dental benefits. We're fully insured for vision benefit, and we do carry a specific stop-loss coverage for outlier claims that exceed $300,000. This year, as a matter of fact, I say this year, I'm speaking of fiscal year 2015 now, we did see about $345,000 in claims against our stop-loss insurance. Those were, and that is specific stop-loss. So that is several claims in excess of $300,000. We do manage.
Excuse me. Madam President.
Yes.
Mr. South, I apologize for interrupting you because I think this is one that is confusing to some people, and we spoke about this in our Finance Committee meeting about the stop loss. This does not mean that if you are ill and your hospital cost or medical cost hit $300,000, we stop insuring. Just means that it moves to a different carrier.
The term stop loss means that the fund's liability stops at $300,000. It's essentially a stop loss is essentially an insurance policy that we buy to keep our retention of claims at $300,000. Claims can go up to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they will be paid by our stop-loss carrier. But the liability of our self-insurance fund stops at $300,000, not the benefit to our employee stopping at $300,000.
Thank you very much.
So we do manage this and thank you, Mr. Rodnow, for bringing that very good point up. We manage our health insurance fund through an internal service or proprietary fund. If there's any accountants out there in the audience listening to this, we do manage it according to generally accepted accounting principles, and it's managed in a proprietary fund. In our plan during 2015, we did have 3 levels of coverage. We still have 3 levels of coverage, but in 2015, we had the preferred provider organization, the point of service option, and the exclusive provider organization, or the EPO option. Those are terms that are not really generic terms, but they are specific to Blue Cross, and the names of our plans changed. Benefits are essentially the same. As you're aware, we did go to Cigna as of the 1st of July. We still maintain a 3-tier plan, which is essentially the same coverage that we have with Blue Cross. It's just that the titles of the various plans changed. The board pays 81.3% of the premium cost for the PPO, 85% of the premium cost for the point of service, and 86.3% of the premium cost for the exclusive provider organization. Now, you may wonder why are those numbers different for each of those plans? They're different because the board pays the same amount for each employee, regardless of which plan they choose. The premiums for those plans are different. That's why the percentages are different. So dollar-wise, we pay the same for each employee, whether they select a PPO or an EPO. At the PPO, the employee has to pay a bigger percentage, but the board pays a smaller percentage. If they, for example, choose the lower plan, the EPO, the board pays a higher percentage, pays the same amount dollar-wise, but that equates to a higher percentage of the total premium cost. So what did our enrollment look like in 2015? Well, 64.4% of our enrollees were employees, and 6.4% were retirees under 65 years old. What that means is those 2 groups are combined under the same plan, which I usually call the active plan. Then we have the retirees over 65 years old, or 65 years old and older. 29.2% of our participants fall into those categories, and those folks just participate in a Medicare supplemental plan, giving us a total enrollment of 3,555 employees for 2015. So if we look at the what I call the active plan, the folks that are 65 years that are under 65 years old, what kind of plans do they select? Well, 75.1% in 2015 selected the PPO. That's down about 1% from the prior year. We were up around 76% in FY14. 20.3% of those participated in the POS, or the point of service plan. That was up about 1%, and then about 4.6% of the participants selected the EPO. That participation remained about flat between 2014 and 2015. So what's the value of this benefit? We talk about what a good benefit plan we have here at the Board of Education, and so what's the value of this benefit? Well, the total cost of this plan for 2015 was over $43.4 million. That breaks down to a value of the health insurance benefit to the average participant in FY15 of about $12,233. Now, that number can be a little deceiving because if you're a single person only taking the employee-only plan and you're taking the cheapest option, which may be the EPO, your benefit may only be in the neighborhood of $6,000 or $7,000. However, if you're selecting the family plan, your benefit could be as high as in the low $20,000 range. So that is a very wide range there. But to the average employee, it's about $12,233. You, the Board of Education, you're the supported this plan, this tax-free benefit for your employees, to the tune of $30.7 million last year. So it is no small item on our budget, as you all are well aware. Let's look at our historical plan strength. And when I talk about the plan strength, I'm talking about what does our fund balance look like in that particular fund. And the board policy states that the fund should maintain a fund balance in the neighborhood of $3 million. Now that is using a formula that says we're going to keep approximately 10 times our highest exposure. And since we do have $300,000 stop loss, our highest individual exposure is $300,000. So 10 times that would be the $3 million. Looking back 5 years, you'll see that in the previous 4 years, starting in 2011 up through 2014, our fund balance went from about $1.96 million up to almost $9.5 million in June of 14. Then we did take some steps to start to bring that down, that number, because it was really starting to get pretty high on us. And you'll see that as of the close of the fiscal year 2015, that number came down to $6.8 million. And I'll talk in just a minute on the next slide about how we did that and why we did that. The current plan strength, the plan does continue to maintain its strength. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we ended the year with $6.8 million in our fund balance. And that's a reduction of $2.6 million from the prior year. 1.4 million of that 2.6 is attributable to the premium holiday that the board granted in December of 2014. The remaining 1.2% reduction, $1.2 million reduction, was a result of implementing premium increases that were somewhat less than what was actuarially calculated. Now that was a conscious effort to help bring down the fund balance and get it back down into the $3 million range. And we've done that over the last 4 years. We've implemented, we are now in the 4th year of a 1% per year increase in the health insurance premium for our employees.
Over the last 4 years?
Over the last 4 years, yes, ma'am. Now, as the reserve approaches...
I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams.
I'm sorry.
Say that again. A 1% increase
per year
each year
over the last 4.
Over the past 4.
Yes, ma'am.
Over the past
yes,
4. Thank you.
And the reason for that is we were consciously trying to bring that fund balance down. And if you go back a couple slides, you'll see that even though we were trying to bring it down, it was increasing on us, so that we had some conversations with our actuaries. We said, you know, you're telling us to increase it by 3 or 4%. We're only increasing it by 1, and here our fund balance is still going up. We had several years of very good claims experience associated with that same period. So I would mention that also.
Mr. South, again, compare that. I think since I've been on the board, we've had 1 year that was 11% increase, and maybe 1 year that was even higher on premium.
Yes, we did.
So this is...
And that's why I'm coming to this next slide. As we approach that $3 million target, and I say approach it, we're heading in that direction. We're not near it yet. We're still at $6.8 million. We believe we're going to need to start implementing the actuarially calculated increases. That right sizing will likely come about when we bring a budget to you. We'll probably bring a recommendation of somewhat higher than what we have been bringing in the past years. Not having any actuarial figures at this point, I can't tell you what that number is going to be, but I think we'll probably approximate the actuarially calculated number in our budget presentation to the board in next winter. It's important to note, however, that this right sizing, as I've mentioned, will be due to the fact that we have artificially held down our rate increases over the last 4 years, and will have nothing to do with our change of healthcare providers. We would have needed to do this right sizing of the premium regardless of whether we had stayed with Blue Cross, whether we would go on with Aetna, whether we would go on with Cigna, or any of the other carriers that actually bid on our product, because we are actually managing the fund. The provider is managing the claims for us. So when we think about the future plan strength, we obviously have some issues that are associated with the Affordable Care Act that are facing us, some possible fees, and there are some penalties that could be assessed, but we don't believe we are in line for any of those. We've been following the tenets of the Affordable Care Act, and we don't believe we're in line for any of those. But there are some fees associated with it within the next couple of years. But we do believe that the current fund balance does position us well to weather any storms that could come as a result of the Affordable Care Act. And all that being said, I'd be glad to answer any questions that any of you may have at this particular time.
Thank you, Mr. South. Questions? Mr. Ridenour.
Not a question, but just going back to some of the things that we spoke to during our Finance Committee meeting, and one of those, and so that our employees and individuals who utilize our insurance carrier or our insurance plan, what they have to understand is that $1.2 million that you spoke to, if you go back, that went down because we were staying at 1%, that will continue to grow. I mean, it'll bring us down, but at some point, that's when we have to right size.
That's absolutely right. Excuse me. That's absolutely right, Mr. Ridenour. And what we want to do is, President Brightman pointed out that we did at one point have some fairly high increases, and that's why we want to go ahead and proactively start to get back toward the actuarially calculated numbers, so that we don't have a dip and actually maybe even go into the red. Right. We want to kind of slide into that $3 million range and not dive below it. Try to stay in that range. It's kind of a moving target, because not only do you have premium increases to deal with, you've also got you're projecting out many times 18 to 20 months forward what your claims experience is going to be, and that is a gamble in anybody's book.
Right. Thank you, Mr. South.
Additional questions? Yes, Dr. Hardings.
Thank you. Mr. South, could you just say a few words about, because I think some people may get confused as well. We use the term fund balance regarding this. We also have a fund balance that we talk about in another context. We talked about it earlier when we did the budget adjustments. Can you explain the difference between those funds and how a member of the public can understand them?
The fund balance, for those folks that may have taken Accounting 101 and decided that accounting really wasn't their cup of tea, a fund balance in governmental accounting is essentially the same as retained earnings in the private sector, and it's a very good gauge of your strength. The difference between the two funds is that the fund that we talked about earlier when I spoke of the quarterly adjustments was our general fund, which is where most of our operating money comes from. Some operating money comes from our restricted fund, that would be grants and that sort of thing, but the bulk of our operations occur in the general fund. The general fund actually pays the premium, the board's portion of the premium, to the restricted proprietary fund where we have our health insurance. So our health insurance fund is actually segregated from our general fund so that we don't commingle operating monies with monies for our health insurance fund, and we can look at our health insurance fund at any time and say it's all split out, it's all here in one fund, and we know what the strength of our fund is. We know what we need to do as we move forward with our fund, with our premiums and that sort of thing. So it's actually a separate fund on our books from our general fund, and there's a fund balance in that fund also. Fund balances are basically created when your revenues exceed your expenditures, and you have a little bit of excess or extra at the end of the year, it goes into your fund balance. So
Could I-
that's how the fund balances are built.
Could I try another explanation to complement yours? Because I think you
Certainly.
did a great job with it. But for
I
somebody
think
who,
his explanation required a little more than accounting 101.
so
Sorry.
Maybe 102, but maybe
So-
they dropped out at that point.
So perhaps the easiest way for a family or somebody who might be watching this to do it is that our general fund balance is often like a home savings account. It's money that you can use for what you need to use when you need to use it. The difference is, in terms of our medical savings accounts, our fund balance for our medical programs, that's almost like a college savings account. You can only use it for one thing, and that's to pay for college. In this case, we can only use this fund balance to pay for medical expense. So if you're a homeowner or a family, the way to think about it is you have a savings account and you have a college savings account, and we have two separate accounts just like you do. We just play with bigger numbers.
Very good.
And try not to.
I would also point out that because this is the board's health insurance plan, if we don't manage our fund balance in that special account, that college account, if you will, we have to come back over to the day-to-day spending account and take more money out of there to keep the health insurance account solvent. So that's why it's so important that we keep our health insurance account and solvent, monitoring that fund balance at all times.
Okay, that's really all that was the point I was hoping to get to, which is that the general fund balance, the board has great discretion over what we choose to do with those funds, and we've restricted some and unrestricted others. The health insurance fund balance, though, really is restricted. We're not sending money to the commissioners. We can't use that to build the hub. That money's dedicated for one specific purpose.
That's absolutely correct.
And must stay that way.
Must stay that way.
Thank you.
Mrs. Williams.
Not wanting to confuse all of what's been made very clear, as a result of the premium holiday that employees had,
Yes, ma'am.
the board also recognized a benefit in several $100,000, correct? A
Yes, ma'am.
savings.
And that was part of what I reported in the fixed charges category when I did the
So about $800,000 went into the general fund budget because it didn't have to go towards paying the board share of premiums. Is that correct?
Yes,
It
ma'am.
didn't go to the proprietary fund balance.
That's correct.
But that went to our general fund balance.
That's
So
correct,
in this
because
instance,
essentially
that
we-
benefited the fund
You,
balance.
as the Board of Education, did not have to pay your premium share
Right.
for one pay period. And that amount was actually a little bit more than that. It was about $1.5 million.
Oh, was it?
And we realized some of that in prior quarterly adjustments. That's why it was only $800,000 this quarter.
Okay, so this quarter it was 849, but a total of $1.5 million.
There was more.
$1.4 million.
There was more that was realized in prior period.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? I had just a couple. Mr. South, I know that we have set up, I assume it's still active, an employee committee, self-insurance employee committee that gets together and basically they have meetings. I've forgotten what the composition is, but it was set up by the association a couple years ago, or asked to be set up. Is that still active?
We have an active, it's called the Healthcare Committee is what it's called.
Okay.
It's composed of equal membership from the three bargaining units, plus the benefits supervisor, the director of accounting, and myself. And we do meet 3 to 4 times a year, and sometimes more. When we were going through the selection process for the new healthcare
Cigna
folks, we were meeting. It seemed like every night, but we met quite frequently during that period of time. Then there's other times when there's not a whole lot going on that maybe we'll go 4 or 5 months without meeting. But on the average, I'd say 3 to 4 times a year.
And when we have new employees, I assume there's an effort to kind of bring them up to speed on how the self-insurance fund works. And I guess the point I'm getting, I'm hoping that this committee is also pushing out information into the buildings so that there's some help with trying to keep the individual employees informed. And I do think it's easy to be confused about something like this. And I'm just hoping there's a part of this committee that, I don't know if it goes out to the building reps from the association, but I do think there's an opportunity for a learning opportunity for all of our employees.
That committee has gotten more active probably in the last 3 to 4 years than it was prior to that. It's been on the books for many, many years, but in the last 3 to 4 years, it's been very active. And we've seen and whether it's a result of this committee or not, I'm not sure, but we've seen a lot better understanding of how our health insurance works, and the fact that we just like an indemnity plan have to be claims driven. So if our claims go up, our rates go up, and people seem to understand that a lot better now that this committee is active. So I believe you're absolutely right. I believe that information is getting out to the grassroots.
I would just encourage staff liaison to encourage the committee to do that and to continue to do that. So just a personal ask. All right, any additional questions for Mr. South or Dr. Wilcox on this issue?
Chris, did you speak to OPEB? You did. I stepped out for a second. That our OPEB, we're going to have to step up our contribution there.
I did not speak to OPEB.
Might want to.
But if you'd like me to, I would.
Other post-employment benefits.
OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Some years ago, the GASB, which is the Government Accounting Standards Board, mandated that essentially we begin funding the liability for any post-employment or retirement benefit that our boards promise to employees other than pension. Pension's a whole different ballgame. That falls under an entirely different group of rules. That's why this is called other it's other than pensions. In the case of the board, we promise our employees health insurance in retirement. We tell them that they can participate in our health insurance plan. And as I mentioned earlier, I think those folks participate in a Medicare supplemental plan, but they also participate in our dental plan. They participate in our vision plan. When we changed actuaries, when we changed healthcare consultants, we obviously changed actuaries because the actuaries are employed by the particular healthcare consultants. When we moved from CBIZ to Bolton Partners, Bolton calculates the required contribution somewhat differently from the way CBIZ did. They're somewhat more conservative, and after some discussions with some of my peers, it appears that they're more in line with what a lot of other similar consultants are doing. Their calculations indicate that we need to start stepping up our contribution by several $1 million a year. We had told the board that we were overfunded, and we still are overfunded. But this will be our last year of being overfunded in the OPEB contribution. By this time next year, if we don't bump up our contribution, we'll likely be, if not underfunded, we will be right on the verge of becoming underfunded. So that's something that we need to think about as we move into the budget process for FY17, that's going to be something we probably need to step up to the plate, and we'll have some better numbers and some actual numbers that we'll be able to share with the board as we move through the budget process.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to make sure the board knew that was also part of our responsibility in the benefits arena.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity.
Have arrived at board member committee reports. Ms. Greenwald?
WCASC met last night here at CES, and we planned our budget for the year and wrote and finalized our agenda for our first General Assembly on September 15th.
Thank you. Mrs. Harshman? Oops.
I missed the last meeting because of family illness, and so Mr. Gesford chaired that and is going to give the report on
Thank you.
CNI.
Do you want me to wait till I get down to you, Mr.
Sure.
Gesford, and do them both at the same time?
Yeah.
Mrs. Harshman, would you want to announce the next meeting, or is Mr. Gesford going to handle that as well?
We're working on that because we have a couple conflicts, so that will be posted along with the agenda.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes, thank you. The Facilities Committee will meet Tuesday, September 29th at 9:30 a.m. in the Deputy Superintendent's Conference Room on the 3rd floor. And I was not able to attend the August meeting of the Facilities Committee, and I'm hoping that Mrs. Brightman will share some information as to what happened at that meeting in my absence. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Was that 9 or 9:30?
9:30. 9:30.
Mr. Ridenour, that's good with you?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'll just go ahead and then do facilities as we work our way through, if that's all right. Met on August 25th, and Mrs. Williams, sorry you couldn't be there with us. Just some highlights. We had an update on the Jonathan Hager Elementary School. It is at a 50% completion stage, and the good news is on schedule and on budget. And Dr. Michael is shaking his head in concurrence, so thank you. With a planned substantial completion by April 2016. We had a great review of summer projects. Many of them are wrapping up. Looked at some bids, discussed some bids for the maintenance, parking lot expansion. Those will be coming before the board on September 22nd. Had some photos on the Williamsport High School project, the athletic project there, on schedule. And of course, our funding for eligible projects and cost is at 71%. The square footage has gone up, and I think you said it's the highest it's ever been at $282 a square foot. Is that accurate? And there was a percentage of site they're paying. Was that 19? 19. Up to 19. So that's a significant help on future projects. Looking at some QZAB money, which I thought was just to understand how some of that is spent, and that is, oh my gosh, Qualified Zone Academy.
Academic.
What's the B? I've forgotten. Bond. Thank you. Almost there. Of that, $135,000 was spent on generators, Old Forge and Greenbrier. $350,000 on a generator for Williamsport, and $50,000 for a playground at Hickory. Please understand that's all, I wouldn't say free dollars, it's all state money. We don't even have to match that except with volunteer hours, which the facilities department has done a great job of being able to track those and get schools into the habit of documenting those volunteer hours. So that is found money. I think at the next meeting we're going to talk about excess property and maybe have more of a summary of the QZAB dollars that we've been able to obtain from the state over the last few years. So I think that gets me off the hook, Mrs. Williams.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Brightman.
You are welcome. Mr. Gesford, I guess you have a two for finance and
I do.
curriculum.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brightman and board members. We had the Finance Committee meeting on August the 25th. A few things that we had discussed was the healthcare self-fund. Mr. South brought us up to date on that. We talked about the budget adjustments and the budget calendar. Mr. Brandenburg got us up to date on the Tyler Financial software go live and the Tyler payroll software progress. Just a few little glitches along the way, but he said that things are they're working those out with just compatibility with some computers. Mr. South also updated us on the MSDE state aid audit. The committee will meet, and we will send out a date on that once we speak with Mr. South and get that down. On the Curricular and Instruction Committee, we met on that same day, Tuesday, August 25th. Laura Hanks, the supervisor of ELA Social Studies, shared the protected book list with the committee. The committee asked for clarifications and discussed ideas to enhance the book list. Two ideas that were brought before us were to include the themes of the book in a category and also the diversity of the books. So it would be easier to look for characters and helping the teachers, characteristics of to help the teachers quickly select text that may match the interest and experiences of the students. Dr. Pugh, Associate Superintendent of Curricular Instruction, shared the elementary professional development evaluation feedback that that we've had over the last few months. Teachers met at different locations on August the 14th and engaged in work, set the stage for common language and to plan opening day learning experiences. And the committee discussed a draft of a follow-up survey. And Dr. Pugh shared a draft of future topics. They included the committee. The committee will start a calendar of topics for future meetings aligned with the professional development and curriculum development schedules. And at this time, as Mrs. Harshman said, our tentative date is just tentative right now, and we have to work on that. So that's all I have for both of those committees.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Fisher, policy.
Thank you. Policy Committee also met on August 25th. We've been very busy as evidenced on today's agenda because we covered 8 policies today that we either reviewed for second read or worked on for first read in that meeting. We also discussed policy DBK entitled Budget Transfer Authority. At our next meeting, we'll be consulting with Mr. South and with the state laws governing this topic before putting this policy into a new format and making sure it complies with both law and practice. We also reviewed the board's communication processes and operating norms documents as they were sent on to us from the ad hoc committee. We recommended a few very minor changes. We'll be consulting with Dr. Wilcox on those 2 items to make sure we haven't violated anything. And we'll be bringing those eventually back to the full board for a decision as to whether to incorporate them into any other documents or policies, etc. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 8th at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Ridenour?
Yes, the HR committee will meet the 29th at 8:30, which is an adjusted time, in the Washington room.
Thank you. All right. Any MABE reports, committees? Any other reports? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, the MABE Conference Planning Committee will be finishing up on Friday, September 18th, and I'd like to publicly thank Dr. Wilcox for his generous contribution for door prizes, some nice WCPS bling. And some books, I believe.
Books and bling.
And I will be purchasing some things to add to those, or to the items to be contributed on behalf of our board for door prizes to be given out on different days of the conference. I'll be attending the resolution committee meeting on September 30th while at the MABE conference, and as I mentioned during the work session this morning, if my colleagues have anything that they would like to make me aware of with regard to the MABE continuing resolutions, just shoot me an email, please.
Thank you. Mrs. Harshman, was that any? No, okay.
She says ditto.
All right, ditto. Any additional reports? Moving on to consideration of future agenda items, just a couple highlights. Early learning update for September 22nd. We'll hear the findings of the annual financial audit on October 6th. We're projecting a diversity update on October 20th. And a new item is a work session to discuss the state assessment report, which all of you, I think I sent an email out. You should have a link from Mrs. Chekovic. It's a very long, a 300-plus page report, and I think we've sent you just the Washington County portion of that. And at the work session is to discuss the report and develop a response, which boards are mandated to do by November 30th. So that leaves us at board member comment. Ms. Greenwald.
I have nothing at this time.
Thank you. Mrs. Harshman.
Nothing.
Mrs. Williams.
I have nothing.
Dr. Harding.
No comments today.
Mr. Gesford.
Oh, yes, just a few. Thank you. Yesterday I took a ride up to Columbia Gas and, Antietam Cable, and had to just drive by the Commonwealth lot with the buses, and I just want to say that that bus lot looks wonderful. It really does. Just kind of drove down through and saw the lighting that was going to be for a safety issue. It's much higher. My only question is making sure, are we going to have, because there was nothing down on the far end of that, will we be adding more lighting down there for those buses also? I don't know the answer. Okay. That lot is just, so those guys, they were really excited, and bus drivers seem to be able to maneuver the buses very nicely. So if you don't, if you can, take a stroll down there. It looks very nice. Three people that I'd like just to say something about. Sharon Kennedy, who had retired 39 years with the school board. Just want to give a shout out to her and thank her for her service. Jeff Spielman, who is returning out for his 41st year in sports and as a volunteer, and Dave Robinson, a custodian out northern